Hey everyone, it's Nick from Splice, and in today's video, I'm going to go over my recreation of the Stranger Things theme song. The theme song and the show's music were created by Kyle Dixon and Michael Stein of the band Survive. The music features a lot of 80s synths, both digital and analog, and I'm going to use a lot of our V collection and some other rent-to-own synths to make this recreation. So let's take a listen. If you like what you heard, be sure to download the project linked in the description below. I'm now going to walk through the elements and kind of describe the role and the sound design behind each element. And let's actually start with the main melody here. This is the first thing that I transcribed and I think is strategically the best thing to do because it also outlines the tonality of the piece as well as a lot of the other kind of chords that are used. So this main melody is actually was not arpeggiated. The creators did say that was a common misconception that they actually did perform it in. However, it does sound like an arpeggio. It is an arpeggio itself, and it is an arpeggio of the C major 7th chord. So that's the C, the E, G, and B, and then the C at the top. And it just kind of riffs back and forth like this. So let's hear that. So for the instrument, I used SEM-V from the V collection, and this is an emulation of the Oberheim SEM, the synthesizer expander module. Originally, this was a module that you could attach as a backup synthesizer or attach to a keyboard, and I did see that in the video where Michael and Kyle walked through their gear. This seemed like one of the instruments that they used. So it has a basic oscillator, 2-oscillator setup. It is a saw wave in oscillator 1 and a square wave in oscillator 2, pulse wave. And the most important thing about this sound design, and although this was probably the easiest pattern to get right off the bat, was the hardest to finesse the whole thing, was the automation. So you can see that the filter frequency moves, the envelope of the decay time definitely kind of changes and automates throughout the piece. So that was probably the trickiest part, getting it to open up, say, where it rallies here. It gets pretty staccato and pointed where it kind of builds up in the piece. So that was a good challenge. The other kind of audio processing I put on there was a little transient shaper to get a little more attack and make it a little more staccato. And then I did use Ableton's auto filter to do some of the filter sweeping here. So this is the filter here. If you didn't know, you can actually add these as automation lanes. Remember, automation lanes are just dedicated spaces for automation for a parameter, and I can simply hit this plus to add that frequency as an automation lane, or minus. Now remember, that doesn't actually delete anything destructively, just gets rid of that in the view. So now let's begin at the very beginning. The beginning has this staccato sound, and it's very plucky, and it's an arpeggiator. For this, we just launched Parallels from Softtube on Splice, rent to own. So I was playing around with it. It's a really fun synth. It has this ability to kind of like morph through like a wave cycle. They recorded these maybe a saw wave with a filter sweep, and then that is your like kind of, in a sense, wavetable. I found just a saw wave form here, and this is pretty much all on oscillator 1. And essentially, it is doing the C major arpeggios. That's why finding the original line, the melody that we started with, will kind of inform the notes of a lot of these other parts. Because even though this is a C major 7th, the piece is actually in E minor. And there's not a lot of chord changes to it. It really hovers on that C major 7th, and it just kind of plays around with tonalities. So this is a nice little catchy sound at the beginning. It really propels it forward. You can see there's a little frequency, a little reverb, but really it's the frequency right here, automation just kind of opening up. And the other thing you hear at the beginning is this DX7. I put the DX7 from V Collection as well in here. This was actually just a preset, Another Winter, and I didn't do much to actually change the sound other than the filtering. I put a little Haas effect to make it a little wider. And it's just like the padding that the ARP kind of lays over at the very beginning. So let's hear that. Now we went over the kind of the main melody already, and it starts pretty soft at this point. It's a little behind, and the filter frequency is kind of down. The other thing that you can, it's hard to hear, I don't know if I'm making this up, but there's this counter melody I think I hear in the original. Here's the original for reference. And this gives a little feeling that kind of just propels the top part. It's a little lower. Let's hear the two together. And essentially it kind of goes between the E minor chord and this G major chord. And it's actually, I duplicated the instance of the main melody, which I forgot to say, this is the 3-octave saw preset that is kind of slightly tweaked. I duplicated it and then used the frequency cutoff on a filter to really kind of mute the sound. So the next main element to recreate would be the kick here. And now for the kick, let's take a look at the kick here. This is actually an instance of Serum. Michael and Kyle did mention that they used a synthesizer for the kick and not an actual sample, so I thought it would be good to do that. And this is just a really simple wavetable, the Virus Wavetable 002. And the main thing about this sound is the envelope here. Without the envelope, actually let me do the envelope one. So that really makes it just like a bass drum. It's in tune because I have it on the low C, which is the bottom note of the arpeggiator. That's also a nice thing about doing a synth kick, is you can really make sure the fundamental pitch is locked in with your key. Now, this choir rise is really nice. This is kind of this has a nice layer, and this is, I would say, the icing and the embellishments, the flourishes on top of this. I used an instance of DX7 just to kind of get a high pad in there, and the Bloodsport is the preset name. The other thing I used were these Omnisphere instances. Both of them are under the Human Voices category. I believe choir full vibrato, and I believe the second one is a pop. And let's just take a look, see if it's the boys choir O-A-Ah. And the DX kind of pad continues there. So that's a really important swell. The other sound, I'm going to get to the bass, which I really love the bass in this, but the other really important sound is this, I call it shimmer melody. And it's really, I think it's pretty close to the preset of Fascination, which I think is the first preset when you open Prophet V, which is also in V collection. Michael and Kyle did mention they had a Prophet 5, so I thought this would be a good instrument to kind of see if any of the presets sounded close. And then I actually just added an instance of Serum to make it a little punchier. Let's hear this layer. And that is, I think, a square, sounds square to me. Let's just double check, yeah. So it's a square, it's pretty high unison. I put a little, one of the other virus wavetables on there to give it some texture. And then this gives the Prophet gives a nice filter sweep, which gives that, and it's, when that resonance is really high on a filter sweep, it gives this really unique sound. And let's hear that. Yeah, right there where it's really kind of whistling. It's a really nice effect, but it's also really, I think, important for that kind of nostalgic and big feeling. Cool. And now the other element that I really need to talk about is the bass. And I use the Prophet V for this as well. I use the preset Big Boss to get pretty close, and then I did have to kind of play around with the attack and decay to make it a little punchier. The bass really opens up in filters, so let's take a look at the filter cutoff automation here. So I'm going to click on the filter. So let's take a look at that. It also kind of grows in, with the main melody throughout the song, but it starts really mellow, and it's going between C and E. So while the chord is just on the C major 7th, C, the main melody is going C, E, G, B, C all the whole time, the bass is actually kind of shifting the focus between the C, the E, giving the sense of chord movement, which is really nice and definitely super crucial to the song. So let's hear this. And where we just ended at, the 3 notes down, is like, I think, the most tension in the song. But right before that, the bass actually hits that loudest peak. I really like how the note approaches from that G below to give this kind of variety. It's a really nice line. So let's hear that in context. Maybe right around here. Yeah, and so the really important part here at this, what I called the rally. Is the layering, how the kind of the choir pads, what I call the spooky pad group, kind of follows the same melody as the bass. Let's hear the bass and that layer together. And yeah, so that really just kind of pushes the energy forward right into this release section. So for the release section, the kick kind of drops out, which is nice, gives us some space. And after those three notes, which is D, C, B, comes in this kind of swell. I really like this part. For the swell, I call this the transition element group here, and this is, I think, an instance of parallels. I was just kind of messing around with it and found this Digi Meta 6 wavetable, which sounds really nice. Let's hear that. Well, by itself sounds kind of funky. And the kind of automation there you see is on the color knob, which is, I think, almost like the wavetable position here. Is the color knob, which kind of scans through this captured sound. And there's also a noise layer. Noise layer could probably be a little down. I'm going to adjust that right there. I really like this section. It's where kind of all these elements swirl together, and if you listen to the original right here on this section, is really nice. So it's this kind of like, I think of it's like floating in air, kind of pivot part. And the most important thing, though, I think are all these kind of transition elements, like the engine here. This electricity hum gives the sci-fi feeling for sure. And then this like Jeep engine sound, I just found all these on Splice Sounds, just these kind of sound effects from our cinematic effects library. Kind of build up the energy. It's almost like a small mini riser. And definitely right here, 15, where I call the climax, is definitely where the elements are kind of the loudest, the most full. The choir section here. I love that ionosphere patch. Sounds so full because it's getting higher and higher. Put a little instance of operator here with some noise as the, noise white and noise looped. I don't know why I did that. So just to give a little effect here where we hear, this is the original. Yeah, theirs is a little more tonal. Definitely. You know, doing these recreations, you could spend forever. It feels like sometimes recreating these, you just have to do as best as you can before the deadline. So let's lastly hear this outro part. And this is where I really love the bass here. It kind of stabs at this low point. That is the lowest the bass has gone. It hits that E, the low E here, and it's really just a great feeling. Main melody synth also drops down here at this point. At least I perceived it to drop an octave. It definitely drops an octave here at the very end, where it kind of gives this like last hurrah kind of the original. And then the last hit is what I call like the final thought. And it's really that shimmer melody, which was, again, the combination of the Prophet and the Serum instance. The intro arp, where we heard at the very beginning, kind of makes its reappearance at the end to give a little bubbly texture. Cool, so that's a brief overview of how I recreated the Stranger Things theme song. Don't forget to download the project, linked in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and let us know what other hits you would like to see recreated in the comments below. Until next time.